Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you like this podcast, you will love my new anthology called Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids. Check it out, and you'll hear from 49 authors about all sorts of things moms don't have time to do. All the authors have been on this podcast. Also, check out my TikTok @with Zibby and Tracy, my other podcast, Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy. Check out Moms Don't Have Time to Write on Medium. And of course, my new publishing company called Zibby Books. And now back to our daily author interview site and a quick hello from some of my kids. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Enjoy the show. Florence Williams is the author of Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. She is a journalist, author, and podcaster. Florence is a contributing editor at Outside Magazine and a freelance writer for the New York Times, National Geographic, and numerous other publications. She is also the writer and host of 2 Gracie Award Audible Original series, Breasts Unbound and The 3-Day Effect, as well as Outside Magazine's Double X Factor podcast. Her book, The Nature Fix, was an Audible bestseller. And this book, by the way, Heartbreak, is available on Pushkin.fm and is an absolutely amazing, immersive audio experience. So definitely check that out on Pushkin. Welcome, Florence. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey.
Thank you so much for having me, Zibby. Great to be here.
I feel like I've been through the ringer with you after reading this book. I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry for everything you went through, but I'm glad it spurred this book because it was so interesting. And I loved how you wove together the personal and the research and the dating and, oh my gosh, all the stuff. Why don't you tell listeners a little about what your book is about and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a science journalist. So I typically use events, I guess, from my personal life or just things that happen that I'm become curious about, to sort of drive my work. And in this particular case, it was an unfortunate set of events. My 25-year marriage ended somewhat suddenly, not by my choice. And so for the first time in my life, I found myself reeling from heartbreak. And for some reason, I had been immune from this because I met the man who would be my husband when I was 18. And we stayed together for the next 3 decades. And mostly it was good. I mean, we had 2 kids and a lot of fun and exciting, careers and fun adventures in the downtime. But yeah, I mean, he just basically decided he wanted something different once our kids were teenagers. And I felt that pain registered in my body in a way that I wasn't expecting, that really surprised me, also freaked me out. I mean, I got sick and I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. I had trouble sleeping. I lost all this weight. I felt like I had been plugged into, I think I said, a faulty electrical socket. That kind of weird, like, I'm really freaked out and I don't even understand it. Like, why am I feeling this so much in my body? I thought heartbreak was supposed to just be in our heads. And so that sort of launched me into this investigation of why we need to take heartbreak really seriously and why we need to take our emotions really seriously. For me, it was a whole lesson in sort of emotional intelligence. And yeah, that's how it started.
Well, this is our Valentine's Day episode. So happy Valentine's Day, by the way.
Right. Sometimes it doesn't always last forever.
But the way you wrote about heartbreak and the way, well, first of all, let me just say, it's like a miracle that you and your husband got together the way you did and stayed together for that long. I feel like when you're so young, getting together, any couple that got together young, like the odds are so much less that they stay together forever, right? Because we all change so much. So I thought it was like part of the story that was amazing was the success of it for so long to begin with.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially recounting how you met on your, outward bound-ish, pre-whatever time. By the way, I went to Yale and I don't remember that program at all. I obviously just didn't go.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. It's called Foot.
Oh, it's called Foot. Oh my gosh, that's right. Yeah. I'm not a nature person. I was like, I'm definitely not going on that trip. Yeah, no, that's right. I forgot all about Foot. And he was like your Foot leader, right?
He wasn't my Foot leader, but he was the Foot leader. And I was a Foot freshman.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you took us through your whole relationship. And I feel like the first stumbling block, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course. The first stumbling block was when you had kids, because the two of you were so adventurous and going out and doing all these fun things. And then you referenced now you were in the wilderness, but you had to remember, diapers or whatever, and you had a baby and a Bjorn or whatever, and how that automatically changes the tenor of two adventurous seekers. It raises the question, like, what do you do in a relationship is based on mutual interest, and then all of a sudden one of you can't do it as well or as wholehearted, and what does that do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole, parenting, it's a whole new adventure, right? And
yes.
I'm not one I would have traded for anything, but it changed our relationship in that I think I had hopes or expectations that we would have a more sort of equitable parenting, burden.
Yeah.
And it was disappointing to me that we really didn't. His career sort of took priority, and I was not happy about that. And I also felt just sort of, I think, abandoned in some way in this sort of like, difficult journey of parenting. I was kind of on my own there for large parts of time. And I'm sure that, these sort of small resentments and also just like points of disconnection, feeling like you're not really being supported in the way that you would like to be, they add up over time, unfortunately. And I think maybe partly because we got together so young and had so little experience with other relationships that, we didn't really have the language for communicating, I think, as well as, I mean, I know now how little we knew about kind of communicating our needs and then meeting them, unfortunately.
Well, this concept of sort of midlife heartbreak, right? You always think about, when we think about teens sort of sprawled on the bed with tears and sad music, like that's what heartbreak conjures up for me. But it's very different when it's not just breaking your heart, but this broke your whole life, right? Your whole foundation like shattered because it affected everything. And you have some line in here about how all of a sudden, you had to do these adventures, you had to go on these adventures without your life partner who had literally been by your side for your whole adult life. And then what do you do that day when you wake up and he's not there and your kids aren't there? And how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's two things. One is that I still felt like I was a histrionic teenager. I mean, I was still, lying face down on the bed listening to sad music. I did that plenty. And I think no matter what age you are, heartbreak is going to hit you in sort of similar ways. But yes, it's almost like having a brain injury or something, that you have to relearn everything. You have to relearn how to move through your world, in this completely different way. And yeah, it's a huge blow to your sort of sense of self and your identity when you've been in a partnership like this for so long. And I will say, it feels, even though heartbreak is kind of a universal experience, at the time, it feels very singular. It's a lonely experience. And for college-educated women who have been married for 20 years, the divorce rate is 15%. Like, it's much smaller than, we sort of think of it. I mean, overall in this country, it's 39%, which even that is less than the 50%, that so many of us, I think, grew up hearing. But people just don't, in our demographic, the divorce rate is half of what it was in 1980. So I didn't have any really close friends who'd been through this or who were going through it, certainly at the same time. So yeah, you have to sort of move through the world in a different way, figure out who's going to help you and support you, in a way that perhaps you're not accustomed to sort of seeking. I mean, I had been, sort of super competent and super together and very much wanted to convey that, kind of persona to the world as we do and as we are taught to do in this culture. And suddenly I was like, oh no, I'm really kind of a mess. And it's actually in some ways not so bad being a total mess. As much as my body hurt and was freaking out, eventually I came to recognize that these human emotions are actually a huge part of kind of, understanding who we really are. And, ultimately it makes us more empathetic, I think, to other people's pain. It changed me in that way a lot. And we can talk about more of the upside that comes out sort of later on, but it doesn't necessarily, that does not become apparent, let's just say, in the first throes of heartbreak.
Well, give me some hopeful tips for anyone who has suffered heartbreak, or this is also very similar to loss in a way, right? You lost your life partner.
Yeah,
He's no longer accessible. Grief grief, as you point out, people write about grief all the time, right? How grief affects the brain and grief fog. And there's all this literature and documentation on the fact that grief becomes very physical in its form. And you're taking heartbreak and applying that same filter.
Yeah, I mean, with heartbreak, you have all the grief, but you also have these sort of other layers. For example, rejection. There's kind of this emerging field, psychological field of what happens to your brain on rejection. And as human animals, we are hypersensitive to the group and to the feelings of the group and whether we feel like we belong in the group or whether we've been kicked out. And so when your primary attachment partner takes off, you're dealing with that sort of ostracism kind of feeling as well. And your body basically responds as though you've been left to the jungle by yourself. So you're sort of expecting predators to show up. Humans, we're not supposed to move through the jungle alone. Like, we're just not. Safety in numbers, that's why we are social animals. It's why we're hyper social animals. It's just safer, and it's better for sort of functioning in society or functioning as an individual in a society. And so that's why your nervous system completely freaks out and produces all these stress hormones. Norepinephrine sort of floods into your muscles, into your organs, into your brain. And your immune system changes, like very, very clearly changes. And so one of the first conversations I had was with this researcher at UCLA. And I told him that I had just gotten diagnosed with this autoimmune disease, and I was heartbroken and blah, blah. And he said, well, why don't you come into the lab and we can run you through these studies I do, this blood analysis that's not available, in a typical doctor's office. And we could look at your blood at various time points as you try to sort of recover from this heartbreak and see if your immune system changes. And so that's what we did. And that became kind of one of the backbone sort of scientific explorations that I did in the book. It was really interesting.
And can you share the finding?
Yeah. So in the first time point, which was, 5 months after the split, it turns out that my white blood cells were changing such that, what this Dr. Stephen Cole, he's a neurogeneticist at UCLA. He said, yeah, you look like you have the blood of a lonely person.
Oh.
And we know that lonely people do have a much higher risk for chronic diseases. They have a higher risk, significantly higher risk of dying early. And so his lab has been looking at why, like what's going on in the immune system of people who feel like they don't have social support. And it is, by the way, a subjective feeling. Like, you can live in a family, you can be in a marriage and still feel unsupported, right? And still feel lonely. But so my white blood cells were putting out more transcription factors that upregulate cells that produce inflammation. So as if they're getting ready for an attack by a predator, right? Or a wound, like a blood wound injury while you're stumbling alone through the forest. And at the same time, down-regulating cells that fight viruses. So because viruses are transmitted in groups, maybe our immune system makes this quick calculation, can't do everything. It's like, okay, we're not going to do so much viral defense, we're going to do more wound defense. But that's exactly the wrong call if you're living in modern life. And guess what? You're heading into a pandemic. Or in this case, Steve Cole has spent quite a bit of time studying people with HIV. And, it's the wrong call, obviously, for HIV, where you really want that viral defense. And in our culture, too much inflammation that goes on for too long, we know, leads to all kinds of chronic diseases, from Alzheimer's to heart disease to cardiovascular disease. Well, cardiovascular is the same thing, to things like diabetes. So you don't want it.
No. Yeah, but how can we reprogram the body in this lifetime? Not lifetime. It's more than a lifetime. The way that we're actually programmed. How do we go about saying, like, okay, well, if that's not the right call, now what do we do?
So that was my urgent question, was like, I need to get better, and I need to do it as soon as possible. So that's where I looked to sort of these evidence-based heartbreak recovery plans. I ended up kind of busting, I think, some of the myths that we're told, ways to recover from heartbreak that didn't have science behind them. And I kind of threw everything I had at it. So, I tried to do things like meditating, which we know can help your nervous system get into a calmer place. For me, I had already written this book called The Nature Fix about how being in nature can make us happier and healthier and more creative. And I knew that I loved being in nature. So I turned to that. One of the psychologists I talked to pretty early said to me, she said, yeah, the health statistics for people who are divorced are pretty bad. Like people who are divorced have much worse health outcomes and a 23% increased risk of early death. She said, but we know that some individuals are more resilient than others. And there are certain things there are certain qualities these resilient individuals have. And I practically grabbed her by the shoulders and to beg her to tell me what these things were, because I wanted to be a resilient person. And she said, yeah, it's really interesting. We find that when people have been through tragedies, it's the ones who are able to see beauty and cultivate a sense of beauty, a sense of awe. These are the people who actually seem to sort of come through these tragedies in a way that they can make sense of what's happened to them. They can find joy, still on the other side. Their brains seem connected, have more connections kind of in different parts of the brains that just help them put their own problems into perspective and help them tell themselves a story about what happened and how they can get through this. I thought that was fascinating. And so I left her office just determined to spend even more time. For me, it was in nature. For other people, it might be listening to symphonies or listening to music. And then, I spent time with people who have PTSD and are trying to recover from it, to learn from them. I went on a backpacking trip with a group of fascinating women, young women who have been sex trafficked. And I could not in any way compare my experience to theirs, but they were exhibiting, what I would call sort of post-traumatic growth in a way that their trauma, their resilience became contagious, not just the sort of feelings of stress. I went through this workshop for divorcing people that was EMDR. It was a psychotherapy intervention called EMDR, which utilizes sort of eye movement and bilateral stimulation. That was kind of interesting and maybe somewhat helpful. It is an effective treatment, known to be effective for trauma. I went through psychedelic therapy with a therapist using MDMA and psilocybin as sort of a decoupling drug, which is not often how we hear it. And then I put myself through this wilderness adventure where I spent 30 days on a wilderness river, including 14 days of it alone, to try to learn how to be alone, how to rely on myself, how to access some bravery. So I did all that and I ended up writing about it.
Wow. So for people who can't necessarily take off and, take a canoe with a bathroom on one side of it and, try to go camping and doing all the stuff, from all your research, what is the best thing for people to do? What can people do?
Well, I have this kind of 3-part plan that's sort of general enough that people can kind of customize it to what works. So the first, I'll tell you the 3 parts and then I'll go into them. It's number 1, calm. You have to calm down. Number 2, connect. And number 3 is purpose and meaning. And so should I just dive into like sort of the first part there?
Sure.
Yeah. So, your body basically, as I said, is kind of in fight or flight. And so you have to figure out how to get out of that so that you can then do the work for healing, because none of that's going to happen when you're sort of in the grip of a giant freak out. So do what you do that can help you calm down and sort of get you out of this kind of zone of acute trauma. For me, that was movement, it's breathing, it's nature, it's meditating, dancing, whatever. Okay, so then the connection piece is both connecting authentically with people you love. So, family members, your good friends, lean on them. You'll find out who's there for you and who isn't. And, with divorce, I think sometimes people feel like it might be contagious or something. And and so much of our social world is built upon couples or on family units. And so when yours kind of dissolves, it is interesting, like who really shows up for you and kind of who doesn't. But also connecting to nature and connecting to beauty. So anything you can do that helps you feel like you're part of a larger universe, that puts your own sort of dramas into perspective. When we feel connected to other people and when we feel connected to the world around us, it does kind of shrink our egos in this really, really beneficial way. Not in a way that damages our self-esteem, but just in a way that sort of raises the importance and significance and beauty of everything else. And I talk a lot about the power of awe, to do that in the book. So that's part of the connection piece. And then finally, it's this purpose and meaning. And when I worked with this geneticist at UCLA, he said what we have found when we analyze blood in groups of people and we give them interventions to do, like volunteering, at schools or whatever, he said the healthier immune system is not really linked to sociality or hanging out with people or even like rating yourself as happier. It's not sort of about feeling happy. It's really about finding purpose in your life. And so if you're volunteering in a way or whatever, you can find purpose in your family unit, you can find purpose in your work. If you can do that, then you may not feel like you wake up every morning like mirthful and giggling, but you have this sort of like North Star that really fulfills you in a way that Americans just aren't, I think, used to sort of equating with well-being or happiness. But he said those are the people who actually have the best immune systems and the best looking blood. So that's a really hugely important antidote to both loneliness and heartbreak.
I want to FedEx him some of my blood and see what he thinks.
Someday maybe we'll all be able to do. It'll be on the Apple Watch eventually, but it's not there yet. Are you lonely today? Here's what you need to do. Here's what helps you, Zibby. What helps you is taking a bubble bath.
Interesting.
But what helps me is walking through the woods. Eventually, I think it's not unrealistic to think that personalized medicine might be able to help us figure this out. Like when are our blood cells, when are our white blood cells happiest?
Wow. Yeah. It all comes down to meditation.
Meditation is certainly a huge intervention for some people, but not for everybody.
Right. No,
it doesn't. It's really hard to learn it. Right? It's really hard to do it. It's hard to learn it. And then a lot of times when people do learn it, then, it falls off. Like it's hard to sort of make it sustainable sometimes for some people. Obviously, some people love it.
It's interesting, though, that you can basically take an inventory of your life based on these metrics, right? Like as you're talking, I'm like, well, I live in New York City. When I'm here, I feel less happy, probably because I never leave my house except to drop off the kids. And while I think my house is beautiful, it's not nature. It's not awe-inspiring, right? It looks exactly the same all the time. Whereas when we take a trip to California or something and the sky every morning, it's like you just look at the sky and wonder and be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? That fuels your soul in some way that I think we all know is obvious in some way, but not measurable. And maybe we don't prioritize it enough. If we said it's actually going to save our lives.
That's right. I think
change.
One of the almost definitions of awe is that it surprises you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a little bit of a novelty quality to it and that's why it sort of pulls us out, of our sort of little, comfort zone to make us pay attention and go, whoa, what is that gorgeous purple moon doing tonight?
Right.
Or my God, wow, that butterfly, I did not expect that. But it doesn't have to be the Grand Canyon. You can find awe in things that are close to home. I mean, if you had a houseplant, that's putting out blooms and you really paid attention to that houseplant, you could find awe in that. You could find awe in your connections to your children who always do things that surprise you and make you just, I think, sometimes blown away, right? By their emerging intelligence or their intuition or their just, the way they see the world. They can remind us how to find wonder and awe. But even in a city, there are lots of green spaces. There is a sky. There is a full moon.
I know. I shouldn't have. I'm regretting even saying that as we're talking.
No. I think it's what you said, I think is very, very commonly experienced by people. But most of us do live in cities.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're going to figure out how to make awe and beauty a part of our lives, we actually do need to work at it and be mindful about it. And there's this little acronym, AWE, that I find very helpful, I think, for people who live in cities. And it's like, go out once or twice a day, or do it in your house, or do it with in your kitchen or whatever. But the A stands for attention. Like, just pay attention to something beautiful, and try not to multitask and think of your to-do list or whatever, but just pay attention. And then the W is wait a minute. So sit there with that attention. And the E is exhale. So, take just 2 breaths while you're looking at something beautiful, and sort of, drop the soundtrack of your thinking brain for just a moment to wake up this sensory brain. Smell it, touch it. And even that little exercise has been linked to pretty dramatic increases in people's well-being. It's amazing.
Okay. Done. I'm going to work it into my day.
Okay.
And we can see the sky. Look, I can just look out my window, obviously, and there is sky, and we do see the changes in the sun. And, I don't want to minimize it. There are waves, and Central Park.
There are birds.
And
there
blah,
are
blah,
clouds.
Blah. There are, yes. We're
and
not
right now,
in a cell.
dramatic weather.
And dramatic weather. I was thinking that during this big snowstorm, right, as the kids were outside and just picking up the snow. And I'm like, how crazy is snow, right? It is so crazy that we walk outside one day and we can touch this. It's people would pay for this, right? People would pay to go.
Your kids love it. They're fully present.
Yeah. No, I love it too. It's so fun. We were snowball fighting. And anyway, but yes, I think all of this, and of course the search for meaning, which I also think people know, but I think people struggle to find meaningful work and how to fit that in and what means something to them, especially when they're running, they're on the treadmill, right? At 8.0, trying to figure out what's meaningful. It's really hard. So
it's really hard. It's really hard.
But at least there's now a framework that's achievable. And that's great and inspiring. And I love that.
Yeah. And I think if we use it as kind of a signpost, when we're making decisions or planning, even just little and big events in our lives, is this something that's going to give me meaning, or is this something that's going to entertain me? Is this something that's going to, amuse me, or is this something that is actually, going to fulfill me in a deeper way? And these are sort of obvious questions, but I think we're not used to necessarily analyzing our decision tree with this as a goalpost.
Yeah. I find this all completely fascinating. And I'm just wondering, I didn't talk at all about the writing of this book or anything, but what, if you're giving advice to someone who's trying to do something similar and write a book like this, you did such a great job of weaving your story in with the science and making the science very digestible, right? It's not confusing. It's lay people's science that's very impactful, right? Because it has these action steps associated with it. So how do you do it? What's the secret?
How do I do it? Well, I've been doing it for 20 years. So that helps. Yeah, I've been a science journalist for a long time. I find that humor is kind of a key ingredient in helping the science become digestible. And I apply humor, I think, towards myself. And I also sometimes apply it to other people just to make them seem more human too. So the scientists I meet, it was so interesting when I was working on this book, Zibby, because, I would go to some lab and talk to some illustrious scientist. And I would say, yeah, I was married for 25 years and then my heart got broken and this is why I'm writing this book. And they would say, oh yeah, heartbreak. Boy, when I was in graduate school, blah, blah, blah. Or I just got this phone call, about my mother. People, the scientists I talked to, it instantly would share their own heartbreaks in a way that was so just personally validating. It's just nice to have people say, yeah, I've been there, right? How helpful is that? But it also became, I think, helpful in the book because it humanized them as characters that I wrote about.
Very true. All right, good tip. And also, I'm excited to listen to the Pushkin audiobook.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I'm super excited about that. We did something really creative with that because I had done, quite a bit of audio work. I took tape of all these interviews. I took tape of my friends. I even taped my therapist talking to me on Zoom. I taped, some of the boyfriends along the way, and I spoke into an audio journal. And so we actually wove in that sort of in the moment tape for a really immersive audiobook experience.
Oh my gosh, very exciting. I actually first heard about your book from someone at Pushkin who I was having a meeting with. Anyway, it was awesome. Florence, thank you. Thank you for this Valentine's treat, this inspiring roadmap to more fulfilling, purposeful lives while we're heartbroken or not, just how to live better. I mean, what better gift is that? So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Zibby. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.